Creative Babble.
Warning, this episode is as true crime as this podcast gets, so listener discretion is advised. During my investigation into the allegations surrounding LaDonna Humphrey's intimidation and harassment campaign, I stumbled upon a tip concerning the Melissa Witt case. But I put it aside because it didn't really tie directly into the central theme of the series.
I had gone to someone's door and they had confessed that they were with the person that killed Melissa the night that she died.
That is Patti Rush, president of Revamp, a victims advocacy group based out of Fort Smith, Arkansas. And yeah, you heard right. Patti Rush interviewed a man who may have spoken to Melissa Witt's killer the night Melissa Witt disappeared. Yet you've never seen or read about this witness in the news, and LaDonna Humphrey has never brought his name up during any of her podcasts, books, or documentary. So how did Patti Rush stumble upon this tip? Well, one afternoon, she showed up to Thomas Seymour's house, looking for information about something else. It had nothing to do with the Melissa Witt case.
I did not go there for that reason. I went there for a different reason. And he just said, "Hey, you're here about Missy Witt, aren't you?" And I, of course, said yes.
Patti was not expecting Thomas Seymour to bring up Melissa Witt, but she went along with it anyway. After that first interaction, she asked Seymour if he could stop by the Revamp office and record a statement.
And so he came to the office and he signed a notarized statement. And he stuck to his story. We videotaped it. We gave it to the federal agency. And they said, "Hey, we're going to move this to our number one priority." And they formed a task force now.
This was a collaboration with the Fort Smith Police Department, Crawford County, Sebastian County, Van Buren Police Department, and the FBI.
Fort Smith was also present during that meeting. The chief deputy was there, and the federal agency made it clear that as long as LaDonna and her team, and I'm going to say team because I've never met her team, no one's ever met her team, are not involved.
As long as LaDonna's not involved? That's going to become a recurring theme during this investigation into the Witt case. Almost everything that we know about the Witt case has come out of LaDonna's so-called investigation. This case has been so contaminated with false and misleading information that even Patti Rush, who knew Melissa Witt before she was killed, doesn't even know what's true or not anymore. But now, Patti Rush may have stumbled upon a huge lead. Is it possible that Patti Rush has been on the killer's trail this whole time? At first, I set this tip aside, but it's been nagging at me this entire time. The more I look into it, the more I'm starting to believe that this tip could connect all the dots on the Melissa Witt case. So I changed my mind. I'm going to pull on this thread some more and see where it leads me. I reached out to the witness. His name is Thomas Seymour, over the phone, text, email, and nothing. If I want to talk to this guy, there's only one way to do it, and that is to hop on a plane and go talk to him in person. So that's what I did. In today's episode, we are going to rewrite history. So much of what we know about the Melissa Witt case has been mangled by the Fort Smith Police Department and LaDonna Humphrey. This case has been contaminated so badly that it's hard to distinguish what's real and what's not. The Melissa Witt case is not a cold case. It is a botched case. And in today's episode, we are going to attempt to fix that. I'm Javier Leyva, and this is Pretend. Stories about real people pretending to be someone else.
Hey, Prime members, are you tired of ads interfering with your favorite podcasts?
Good news! With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free podcasts. That's amazon.com/ad-free podcasts to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
If you're going to pick a case to fuck up beyond recognition for your own personal gain, the Melissa Witt case is perfect. Think about it. By the time LaDonna took interest in this case, it had been a cold case for almost 2 decades. Melissa Witt was an only child. Both her mother and father have passed away. There are no serious leads. It was the perfect case for LaDonna Humphrey because nobody could question her. Even the people who knew Missy Witt have a hard time telling what's real and what's part of LaDonna's narrative of the case. So in order to do Melissa Witt's story justice, which she deserves justice, by the way, I need to bring you back up to speed. For that, I reached out to Tara Lindberg, who is a childhood friend of Melissa Witt.
She was a year older than me, so she was 5 going on 6, and I was 4 going on 5.
One of Tara's earliest memories of Melissa Witt was the time that Tara's mom made cookies.
And she was very, very outgoing and not bashful, and helped herself to some chocolate chip cookies, and we just became good friends after that. We lived on the street from each other. Even though we were a grade apart, we spent a lot of time together. We were just neighborhood buddies and good friends. And then when I went to college, we went to the same college at West Ark in Fort Smith. We had classes together, and we would hang out on the weekends.
Tara has fond memories of her friendship with Melissa Witt, but it's the night Melissa disappeared that replays over and over in her head.
So the night that she went missing, that December 1st, I still lived at home with my parents, and my mom got a call from her mom, Mary Ann, about, I don't know what time it was, midnight, 1, 2 o'clock, something in the morning. I was asleep, and my mom came and woke me up and just said, "Hey, Mary Ann's on the phone, and she can't find Missy. Missy didn't come home. Do you know where she is?" And I said, "No, I didn't." And she and I had plans to go out that weekend together. And then the police came and knocked on the door to the biology class and asked to see me, and just kind of, normal questions like, when did you talk to her last, this and that. Was she mad at her mom? The normal things police always think, somebody ran away from home. But I knew that wasn't like Missy. So no. And so it's like, oh, I'm sure something weird happened. I don't know what that would be, but I'm sure everything's fine, because it just didn't seem like it was really real. And then obviously we realized it was real.
Reality started to sink in when December 1st turned to December 5th, then Christmas rolled around, and Melissa was still nowhere to be found.
You're just trying to figure out what the heck has happened and how do we find her. And obviously, you start to realize the more time that goes by, that the likelihood of a positive, happy ending becomes less and less.
The calendar flipped from 1994 to 1995, and on New Year's Day, Melissa was still missing. It wasn't until January 13th when 2 hunters in the Ozarks National Forest made a grisly discovery.
January 13th, as there was a Friday the 13th, and that's when they found the body in the woods, and then the dental records confirmed that was indeed Missy.
Melissa Witt, who was 19 years old, was found nude, and her killer took her clothes, shoes, and jewelry. It was later determined that she was strangled to death. One thing is almost certain. That killer was not Melissa Witt's boyfriend, Daniel Watson. So then, who could it have been? In previous episodes, I reported that one main suspect could be Charles Ray Vines, a man known as a River Valley serial killer. We spoke about Charles Ray Vines in the previous episodes, but it deserves one more examination. According to LaDonna Humphrey, Charles Ray Vines couldn't possibly be the killer, but she could never really convince us why.
I think it was like episode 11 where you kind of rule out Charles Ray Vines as a suspect. And I was curious, why? You didn't go into what your reasonings were?
There's a lot of work that was done by the original lead detective, J.C. Ryder and Chris Boyd, on Vines. They spent a lot of time with him, and they do not believe he's a viable suspect. I tend to agree with that as well. And I'm not really sure how much information I can give on that, but I'm convinced that he's not a viable suspect in the Witt case. Now, I guess somebody could prove all of us wrong.
And that someone could be Patti Rush. Patti Rush considers herself a victim of LaDonna Humphrey. But in a way, she's more than that. LaDonna Humphrey is more like the Bizarro version of Patti Rush. In the Superman comics, Bizarro is a distorted image of Superman. They have very similar abilities, but Bizarro Superman uses his powers in a dangerous way. And that's exactly Patti Rush versus LaDonna Humphrey. Both women are involved in true crime and advocacy, yet Patti works behind the scenes while LaDonna seeks fame. Unlike LaDonna Humphrey, Patti isn't constantly seeking the media's attention to prop up her involvement in the case. In fact, it took a lot of convincing to get Patti to allow me to share with you the circumstantial evidence she discovered, in fear that it could actually jeopardize the case. And we're going to get into that bombshell evidence in just a bit, but first, let's refresh everyone on how Patti and LaDonna are connected. If you recall, Patti Rush got taunting messages from a person identifying himself as the Muffin Man after she reported LaDonna Humphrey for posting Melissa Witt's crime scene video on YouTube. Initially, Patti Rush believed that the Muffin Man might be Melissa Witt's killer, based on the harassing messages she received that referenced Melissa's murder site and other specific details related to the case. The constant messages from the Muffin Man seemed to imply that maybe the sender had knowledge of the crime. However, as the harassment continued and more details emerged, Patti Rush began to suspect that the Muffin Man might not be Melissa's killer, but rather LaDonna Humphrey, trying to intimidate and manipulate Patti. It seems LaDonna Humphrey has a deep hatred for Patti Rush. She writes about Patti using the pseudonym Sandy Jones. Here she is bad-mouthing Patti Rush on the Broken Systems podcast.
In one of the books, my first book, I talk about a woman named Sandy Jones, and basically she's just a troublemaker. And being introduced to somebody that would provide false information to us in the case was really new to me. Maybe I was naive to that or just didn't really understand that happened in cold cases or in any case, but it does.
But so far, the only person providing false information about the Missy Witt case is not Patti Rush. It's LaDonna Humphrey herself.
I knew Missy. My husband knew Missy. I really wanted to see justice for her. And it's been over 30 years. I just didn't see that was happening. And when I saw the crime scene video online on YouTube, it devastated me. It really did. Not just because I couldn't believe it was there. All you had to do was send the link to somebody. That's all you had to do. I sent it to our treasurer, who's now the mayor over in Barley. He saw the first couple of minutes of it, but I sent it to him and I said, am I overreacting? He clicked on it and he watched a bit of it. And he was like, no, you're not overreacting. I thought it was very disrespectful to her.
Since this series first dropped, it is believed that Fort Smith Police Department is conducting an internal investigation trying to figure out how LaDonna Humphrey obtained so much access to the Missy Witt case files.
What do you think about Fort Smith PD's handling of the internal investigation that they're conducting? Because it sounds like they are conducting an internal investigation.
I want to hope that they're being serious because this is a bad stain on them. I mean, I can't imagine why she sent all these texts that says she took the video. They didn't know she took the video until after the fact, that it's now being jeopardized. It's now lost its chain of custody. From what interactions I've had with them, they didn't seem to know about this until I reported it. So I'm hoping that the people that are still there are not trying to cover this up. I don't think there'll be any advantage to that. So I'm hoping they do the right thing.
Throughout this podcast, you've heard LaDonna Humphrey attempting to frame Daniel Watson as Melissa Witt's killer, despite having no evidence.
We've always said that, we've got somebody in mind. And if we're wrong, then we're wrong.
And she's wrong. In today's episode, I'm not going to claim that we solved Melissa Witt's murder, but I am going to make a hell of a good case that it's not Daniel Watson. It's most likely Charles Ray Vines, a suspect LaDonna refuses to accept.
I would definitely like to see the Witt case solved. It doesn't have to be who we think it is. If it ends up being Charles Ray Vines, then wow, I think we'll all be really, really shocked, but I'll be glad that the case is solved.
I wonder if at the end of this episode, LaDonna will be compelled over to hand Patti Rush the $29,000 reward money that she set up to find Melissa Witt's killer. When we come back, we are going to dive headfirst into Charles Ray Vine's history. You're going to hear from a friend, a former colleague, and we're going to retrace the killer's steps to show you how everything is connected. That's after the break. I landed in Northwest Arkansas with one goal and one goal only: to find Thomas Seymour, the River Valley serial killer's neighbor and friend. It's believed that Thomas Seymour talked with Charles Ray Vines the night Melissa Witt disappeared. After my plane landed, I drove straight to the revamp office to meet Patti Rush and her team.
Goofing off when I come by the office.
Before we set off to find Thomas Seymour, I asked Patti Rush and her team for some more background information.
And he told you that he was with Charles the night that he killed Melissa Witt. Is that true?
Well, he said he was with him up until he abducted her. But I have reason to believe that there may be more to that, because when he tells the story about her being taken to Ozark, he actually uses his hand to demonstrate where everything's at. And it's as he's sitting in the passenger side. He reaches down to reach the skinning knife in the left side. He knows about a dent in the vehicle, and that's the first time it's ever been explained. It's the first time anybody's ever known about it. So he had a lot of details. The more that I talked to him, the more I'm sure he was not just with him before she was abducted, but he was probably with her.
Thomas Seymour talks about a cabin Charles Ray Vines stayed at in the middle of the Ozarks National Forest, not far from where Melissa's body was found.
He says in one of the videos, they went down between these two big structures. They were natural structures, not man-made. He took her down there, and they were going so long, I didn't think they were ever coming back. Does that sound secondhanded to you? I thought they were gone so long, I didn't think they were ever coming back.
According to Patti, Thomas Seymour may have seen Melissa Witt with Vines by the cabin. But hang on to that detail, because I want to ask Thomas Seymour about this. I have the exact GPS location of this cabin. It is 3.4 miles as a crow flies from where those hunters found Melissa Witt's body in the woods. 3.4 miles in the middle of nowhere. What are the chances that a woman is found dead so close to where a known serial killer stayed? You know, I've searched for this cabin using satellite imagery, but it is so wooded that it's hard to tell if anything's actually there. I even used historical aerial sites to try to see what the cabin may have looked like in 1994, but nothing. It is just too dense of a forest. The only way to find this cabin is to try to go there myself.
You were kind of interested in Charles Ray Vines for a long time. Like, when did he first kind of get your attention?
It was probably when he got arrested, because he was not on anybody's radar at first. After he got arrested, I believe that he was responsible for a body that was found right across the state line, door to door.
Patti Rush believes that Charles Ray Vines is responsible for many murders that he wasn't actually charged with.
And the more we learned about Charlie Ray Vines, the more curious I was. It was like, the more that we found out about him, the more questions we had.
Both Patti Rush and LaDonna Humphrey claim to have handwritten jailhouse letters from Charles Ray Vines. LaDonna refuses to turn over those letters. The best she could do was send me a tiny corner of one of the letters with Charles Ray Vines' signature. It's impossible to know what the letter said. Patti Rush, on the other hand, let me read the entire letter from Vines, and he seemed a little irritated.
Well, what had happened is I found out that if you put $10 or more in someone's account, on the first day of the month, they get knocked off the indigent list.
If you're on the indigent list in prison, that means that you have little to no money coming in, which means that you can't afford the basic necessities like soap, toothpaste, and toilet paper.
So every month, on the last day of the month, I would put $10 in his account and knock him off the indigent list, and he wouldn't get his free stuff to trade. And it was really making him mad, but he couldn't stop me.
Before he was known as a River Valley killer, Charles Ray Vines was not well known in the area. In fact, he didn't even have a violent rap sheet. But looking back, it seems that he may have been involved in many more murders than he was originally charged with. Patti Rush and her team at Revamp are attempting to stitch together mysterious deaths in the area that fit Charles Ray Vine's profile. The first murder that Patti can link to Vines took place in November of 1995. A 14-year-old girl named Leslie Dawn Haig was strangled and found dead in a ravine. No one was ever charged with her murder. The victim's brother-in-law, Patrick Fate, helped Patti Rush gather evidence to see if Vines was involved in the murder.
Where was Leslie discovered?
Leslie was discovered down the street from where we're at now, up on a reservoir in the same neighborhood that Charlie Vine had once lived in.
Charles Ray Vines lived within walking distance of where his sister-in-law was killed. So we think that it's a possibility that Leslie Dawn Haig may have been one of his first victims. He was never really looked at because he was not on the radar at that time. He was never looked at.
In 1989, 4 years after Leslie Dawn Haig was found dead, Charles Ray Vines settled down and got married and had 2 kids. It was after his marriage ended that Patti Rush believes his violent rampage reached a peak.
You also have to look at the 93, 94, when Melissa was taken in the end of 94, Charles Ray Vines was known to attack 2 women in that same area.
Lily Jones was brutally beaten and raped inside her home.
There was an elderly woman named Lily Jones that was attacked, and she was left for dead, but she didn't. She survived, but she was legally blind, so she was not able to identify her attacker.
That same year, in 1993, Juanita Woodford, a 50-year-old woman, was found dead in her bed.
And it was a brutal, brutal murder scene.
The following year, in October 1994, a woman's decapitated head and body were discovered wrapped in plastic in a town called Dora, which is on the border of Fort Smith, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. It was a grisly death. Her heart and lungs were missing, but her body was never identified, although it is believed that she may have been white or Native American. A witness reported seeing a white male with brown hair and a mustache, and being about 6 feet tall with a slender build dragging something wrapped in plastic near that area on October 5th, 1994. The description of the man sounds awfully like Charles Ray Vines. The witness said that the man drove a blue 1990s model Chevrolet Blazer with Arkansas tags. And guess what? Charles Ray Vines' former co-worker says that Vines had access to the same model car during this time period.
The person that found Dora Doe, she got a partial tag. She thought it was her husband. She's driving along, her and her mother, and she sees this dark blue Suburban, and she thinks that it's her husband because they have one identical to it. So he pulls over. So she pulls over behind him, and the mother says, "Whoa, that's an Arkansas tag. That's not your husband." So she's like, "Oh gosh, well, it looks just like him." So they pull out, and when they do, the woman, the mother, gets a good look at the guy. As they're driving off, she looks in the mirror, and she sees a man naked from the waist down getting out of this Suburban. Whatever the reason that they go, they're trying to match the tag. They only get a partial tag. But at that time, Charlie wasn't on the radar. I mean, nobody knew anything about Charlie.
Nobody knew Charlie, as in police didn't know about him, but somebody knew Charles Ray Vines. So I found a former co-worker who spent many hours alone in a cemetery with the infamous killer. We'll call him Richard.
We worked a lot together, installing monuments.
Richard and Charles Ray Vines worked at a monument company placing headstones at grave sites. The way Richard describes it, it sounds like back-breaking work.
We sweated on each other. Somebody got hurt and bled on each other. We just toe-to-toe, nose-to-nose, doing a tough job.
You spent a lot of time together.
That's right. It's heavy. Granite, the gray granite is the light stuff. Weighs 190 pounds a cubic foot. Jet black monument, granite, weighs like 230 pounds a cubic foot.
Richard says that he had no idea that the man who he spent so many hours with was a brutal killer.
So that's a long time that you're with him out there, and you probably had a lot of conversations, or were you kind of quiet, or what?
Yeah, he's the one that told me if you ever need to hide a body, you do it in a cemetery.
Richard thought Vines just had a dark sense of humor, but who thinks about hiding a body in plain sight?
It's creepy, huh?
Yeah,
And I mean, you work with around death. I mean, that's your job. You know, you were doing the headstones, and then there's people who work at the mortuary, but like, he seemed pretty dark even for somebody that's comfortable with death.
Yeah, he seemed all right about it. I knew something was wrong, and I wasn't able to put my finger on it until after he had left employment with us. And then we got caught. All the pieces just kind of fell into place why he was such an odd duck.
An odd duck, to put it lightly. Charles Ray Vines grew up surrounded by death. His father, Neil Ray Vines, was a funeral director for 50 years and a coroner for 38 years. As an only child, Charles Ray Vines says that he got arrested several times for fighting. He has a few traffic violations, bankruptcy, but nothing really alarming. During a police interrogation, Vines admitted that most of his earlier crimes were as a result of drug and alcohol abuse. And he says that many of his charges may have been dismissed due to the fact that his father, the coroner, had close ties to a local judge. He graduated high school and is believed that he enlisted in the Army but was dishonorably discharged. Like I said previously, Vines was ultimately stopped when he was found raping and strangling a 16-year-old girl in her home. And what's strange about the incident is that the girl was his friend's daughter. After his arrest, a psych evaluation showed that he seemed coherent and had a good handle on reality. He was, quote, not psychotic, as written in the report. He appeared, quote, normal, and that there was no evidence of hallucination of any type. And his IQ test suggests that he has an average intelligence. DNA evidence linked Vines to some other previous murders, but it wasn't like he just confessed to all of them. Even the murders linked to him with DNA evidence, Vines claims that he has no memory of the incident. For example, when he was asked why he raped and attempted to murder that 16-year-old girl, he said, I don't know. Vines said that he took meth and drank a half-gallon of whiskey and said, quote, I honestly think I did not do it. When asked about his other crimes, he said, quote, I'd rather not talk about it. So it wasn't like Vines was forthcoming about his murders. God only knows how many other victims could be tied to him. One disturbing detail that we cannot ignore is the fact that Charles Ray Vines would sexually assault his victims after they were dead.
I think he does have this thing about necrophilia. I think he had that since he was a young child because his dad was coroner. His dad also ran a funeral home.
Here's Richard again, Vines' coworker at the headstone company.
He worked two jobs. He worked monument company, which is owned by the funeral home. He worked with me during the day, and then during the night, he would go over and stay the night at the funeral home, and he got another check from there.
And so what did he do there at the funeral home?
He was not kind of the night watchman. If somebody died during the evening or the night, they called the funeral home, and he called the embalmer to go get them.
Man, I guess that's kind of creepy knowing what we know now, right?
Yeah. The embalmer would go get the body and bring it to the funeral home, and then they would leave it and come back in the morning and embalm the body.
Did you ever suspect that maybe he was doing something nefarious with the bodies or anything like that?
Well, it's just kind of hearsay or kind of speculation.
But he would have had access, right, to all those bodies that were there overnight?
Oh, yeah.
And in one of the interviews, he says that necrophilia was probably his favorite fantasy. And so I talked to one of the sheriffs out there, and he says, Patti, the reason that we didn't come forward with that information is because do you know what a panic it would cause in Fort Smith area? Everybody would want to know if their mother's in the grave, if their aunt's in the grave, if their grandmother's in the grave. He said it would be a mass digging up of graves because everybody would be thinking, oh, he handled my grandmother, he handled my sister or my aunt or whatever. And he said we did not want to cause a panic.
One of the arguments that LaDonna Humphrey makes about Charles Ray Vines is that he's often attracted to older women and would kill them in their homes, and that Melissa Witt wasn't his type. But if we zoom out and start looking at the murders that he wasn't charged with, that pattern becomes less clear. Here's Patti Rush again.
I don't think he has a type of victim. I think it's an opportunity thing. I have another account that Charlie approached them completely naked late at night. The woman was moving into her boyfriend's house, and Charlie shows up His truck stops. Charlie gets out. He's completely naked. He approaches her. She goes in and gets her husband's .45, pulls it on him. And she said, in her telling the story, she said he was slipping and sliding because there was so much dew on the ground. The truck backs up. He jumps in and the truck takes off. That tells me there was someone else with him. She lived within walking distance of Charlie Ray Vines and within walking distance of Miss Henderson that was murdered. And within walking distance of the little 16-year-old that was attacked that finally got him caught. All this happened in the Dripping Springs area that he lived in. Elderly woman is attacked and brutally attacked and killed and raped within walking distance of her house. So he would go from area to area. That's what really intrigues me about Leslie Dawn Haig. We determined that he lived within 2 minutes of walking distance of where her body was found. And he's always kind of stuck to an area that he's familiar with.
So maybe his type wasn't age, it was just whoever happened to be living nearby.
Did you ever get the feeling that he was capable of some of the crimes that he was convicted of?
Well, in hindsight, oh yeah.
But at the time, you didn't?
Yeah, I just knew he was a weird duck.
Did he ever tell you, like, about his relationships or anything, like the type of women that he liked? Did he have a type? You know, I guess what I'm getting at is that some people are like, well, he couldn't have killed Melissa Witt because that wasn't his type.
Don't kid yourself. He could have.
Remember when Melissa Witt went missing? Nobody suspected Charles Ray Vines of any of the killings. He wasn't even on police radar. So let's attempt to connect Charles Ray Vines to the murder of Missy Witt. How could these two random people in an area with more than 300,000 people be connected?
Okay, so all that happened in the early 90s. Melissa was taken from the bowling alley. He was an avid pool player. His coworker said that he would carry a cue stick in a case with him everywhere he went because he was such an avid pool player. The bowling alley had pool tables. Charlie Ray Vines' mother was also a bowler. So was Melissa Witt's mother. So it makes perfect sense that they would have known each other because I think Charlie spent a lot of time there playing pool.
Patrick Fate, a family member of one of Vines' possible victims, says that Thomas Seymour implied that Melissa and Vines knew each other.
So apparently they had some kind of contact prior to that because he specifically said he was going to meet that Melissa girl.
To meet Melissa Witt, Missy Witt girl.
That Missy girl or whatever it was that he said. But, I mean, obviously, in his brain, he thought he had met her before somewhere along the line.
Well, and I've interviewed family members that has backed up what Thomas said. I had a statement from a lady that said that Melissa was at Charlie Ray Vines' house a few days before her disappearance.
Yeah. While noteworthy, I can't substantiate the claim that Melissa was seen with Charles Ray Vines. I didn't know Melissa, but she doesn't strike me as the type of person who would hang out with a drug addict serial killer. Next time on Pretend?
I think that we'll go over and see Thomas.
Yeah. Patti Rush and I walk into Thomas Seymour's work to see if he'll talk.
It's 11:14. I don't know what time he takes lunch, but I think we could probably coax him over here for his lunch hour.
Okay.
I think.
You know, he might be more comfortable standing outside of his workplace and talking. Right.
I want to hear for myself what Thomas Seymour remembers about the day Melissa Witt disappeared. And we're going to look back at Charles Ray Vines' cabin, not far from where Melissa Witt was found. That's next time on Pretend. Thank you for letting me take the time to deviate from the LaDonna Humphrey case. I think it's critical to tell Melissa Witt's story the way it happened. Longtime listeners of the show know that the one thing that upsets me the most is when people try to take advantage of victims and their families just to either get money or gain fame. It's maddening to me to think that someone who experienced the worst day of their lives turns around and finds a vulture picking off the scraps of their family's tragedy. Whether it's a quack forensic pathologist with some gizmo or a true crime author with ambitions to be the next Nancy Grace, I will hold you accountable for your actions. My goal is for someone in the future to Google Melissa Witt and not find some bullshit story about some Mickey Mouse watch. Isn't her tragedy bad enough? So bear with me. This episode and the next one is for Missy Witt. Also, I took a short break. Part of it was vacation, then I got sick. But I'm back now and expect new bonus episodes where I try to tie up some loose ends. I know the story sounds like it's winding down, but trust me, people are just starting to discover it and it is catching fire. And that's thanks to you. I am blown away by your support, so keep spreading the word. If you know someone who would enjoy this series, send them a text message with a link to the podcast. Nothing is more powerful than the word of mouth. I really, truly appreciate your support. If you're listening for free and think this is important work, make a one-time donation. It's like buying me a coffee or paying for a couple minutes of the short phone call I had with my attorney. It's the same thing, right? Remember, if you are an Apple listener, you can subscribe to Pretend Plus directly off of the Apple Podcast app. If you prefer Patreon for the swag, bonus episodes, and the community feature, sign up for Patreon on your computer and not the App Store on your iPhone. Did you know that Apple charges you an extra 30%? And you don't need to be paying for that, so pro tip, just go and sign up through your computer. And by the way, Patreon has a new feature where I can schedule an episode to drop. It gives you a countdown for when the episode is released. And the best part is that you can listen to the episode with me in real time and with the other Patreon supporters, and we get to chat about it. And oh my God, it is so cool. Even for me, I'm the one who created the episode, and just reading the live chat and seeing your reactions in real time is priceless. So make sure you take part of that feature. I really love it. Okay, well, that's it for today. Thank you again for your support. The next episode will be on Patreon and on Pretend Plus as soon as it's ready. If you're listening on the regular feed, the episode is probably already up, so go check it out. Today's episode was produced and written by me, Javier Leiva, and edited by the talented Punis Shenoy. Our theme song was composed by Joe Basile with thechicken.net. All right, we'll talk real soon.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Creative Babble.